The Dogman Pumpkin Massacre. Massacre. Dear Scary Stories NYC. Hey, Scary Biggie, I'm a listener for a year, but this is my first email to you. I hadn't wanted to admit I listened because I'm supposed to be an adult, and I always thought monster stories were kid stuff. Then I figured out by reading some of the comments that a lot of your audience seems to be 30 or over. I have a story about some animals that stood up like men and bothered my family one autumn when I was 20 years old. I think they were dogmen. In fact, when I talk about it now with my family, we all usually refer to them as the dogmen who bothered us in our first year when we moved out to the Midwest. They might also have been werewolves. And they might have also been men, wearing extremely sophisticated and realistic-looking werewolf costumes. I can't really say. If they were hoaxed, however, I am thoroughly impressed with the workmanship of those costume creators and the actors who must have been inside those suits. They look better than any movie werewolves I've ever seen, and I'm quite interested in watching werewolf movies ever since then. I always hoped I would see the same costumes in a film or TV show that we had seen in person that fall, but I never have. If what we saw was man-made, that was a makeup effects and costuming genius who never got discovered by the business. I tend to lean toward thinking that those creatures were all very real, even though I still waver back and forth between different views about what brand of reality they actually were. What I mean is, some days I feel they were upright walking canines or dogmen, and other days I think that they behaved so intelligently that maybe they were werewolves, or shape-shifting native shamans, or even vampires, who in some cultures are said to be able to become giant human-sized bats, or even semi-human wolves. Whatever they were, there were a pack of them, and it was on our third night in the new house when the problems with them started. My family was originally from New Jersey, where we competed in a friendly way with our neighbors to see who could put on the biggest Halloween display in our front yards. We did it all again for Christmas, but this story is about Halloween. Then we moved to a fairly northern town in Wisconsin, because my father's job shifted their base of operations over there. Our way of being friendly was to move in on a Thursday, then begin setting up our October Halloween lawn display on Saturday. We never really took a minute to look around the neighborhood first to see what the local customs were for the season. We just got to work carving up over 30 pumpkins into jack-o'-lanterns. Then we made fake tombstones with funny names and sayings on them and so forth. Once we were done, Dad had us all climb into the station wagon for a ride around town to see what our new neighbors had done for their Halloween displays. Well, I think one house had a paper skeleton peeking out of a window, and another house had a black cat on the front door. We got a weird sinking suspicion that nobody was going to appreciate all the work we did, stuffing old clothing and putting pumpkin heads on top of the fake bodies. The one we made look like he had been decapitated, including fake blood, seemed least likely to go over well. We've all come to appreciate the genuine warmth of the people who live out here in the years since, but on that first weekend, we felt a cold breeze blowing in more ways than one. When we got back home, the 2 pumpkins in the front by the driveway had been smashed to bits. We cleaned them up, and our mood was weird as we got ready for bed that night. I think our entire family wondered if we were already hated by the people all around us, or if maybe the pumpkins had been smashed by some local troublemaking kids. We never considered that our jack-o'-lanterns and display might have offended some other kind of neighbor besides our human ones. That night I was just falling asleep when something slammed hard against the outside of my bedroom wall. I was awake again in a second, my heart beating hard in my chest. When I went to my second-story bedroom window and looked down into the yard behind the house, the glass in front of me got splattered with a big and wet pumpkin. I knew exactly which one that was, since my mother had warned me that it looked too ripe to use. That was exactly why I wanted it, because it already looked a bit nasty before I even carved the old monster face into it. Now some jerk had thrown it all over my window, making it impossible for me to see outside. I ran out of my room into the hallway, where I saw my sister looking frightened, staring into my parents' bedroom. Slipping past her, I found Mom and Dad looking equally stunned, staring out of their window and down onto the lawn. I had wanted to tell them what I knew, but I could see they already knew more than I did. Silently, I snuck up alongside them and peeked out the window, where I saw something that sort of opened the top of my skull and scrambled my brains inside. There was a really, really tall man with very, very tall ears about to pitch an extremely orange softball across our lawn. When he launched it, the ball crashed against an old couple built out of pumpkin heads and straw bodies. As the softball broke apart, I understood that it had in fact been a medium-sized pumpkin, closer to the size of a basketball than a softball. And as I came fully awake and looked again at the backyard I was not yet really familiar with, I understood that that tall man was in fact something of a giant. I think he was bear-sized, like 9 or 10 feet tall when standing up, and he had hands even larger than the biggest NBA player. That's why I kept wondering how that costume was made, because this had hands, not paws. Granted, there were scary long claws on those hands, but they still were not paws. So in that moment, I was thinking that this was a human being. It's just that this human had a set of legs on him that seemed constructed far more like a wolf's back legs than any human being I've ever seen. When it swung its head around to look for what other destruction it could cause, I saw that head from a few different angles in just a second or two. I tell you, it caused me to gasp, because the ears seemed to move as the head was turning. How do you make ears in a Dogman mask move independently without some kind of hydraulics or other mechanism? Unless that really was the guy's actual head I was looking at? And if it was, how did that sort of wolf-like and sort of German shepherd-like canine head get up on top of those big, muscular, fur-covered shoulders? This was a two-legged creature with the head, legs, and tail of a four-legged beast. After causing his destruction, the Dogman darted into the shadows to our left as another pumpkin crashed into the same old couple display from a completely different direction. There had to be at least 2 figures out there in the night, messing up our Halloween display. At this point, my sister asked if anyone knew where her cat was, which caused all of us to stop what we were doing and search the house for Striper. We didn't know yet where the cat's secret hiding spots were in that house, so we looked around for nearly an hour. And then we found the cat sitting on my sister's bed, watching us all like we were crazy. We don't know how she got there, but if you've ever lived with a cat, then you probably had something like this happen to you as well. By the time we knew Striper had not fallen victim to the pack of dogmen outside, we could no longer see or hear the beasts out there. I was ordered to bed, as it was near midnight, and we had a lot of cleaning up to do in the morning before getting washed up to go to our new church for the first time. Again, I don't think I'd been asleep for very long when a sort of a squeaking noise woke me up again. I tried to ignore it, but it kept coming back. I couldn't figure out what it was that I was hearing. Finally, it annoyed me to the point where I had to get up out of bed and look around. I didn't detect anything out of the ordinary till I noticed movement at the pumpkin-covered window. Turning my full attention to that window, I noticed something that I at first took to be a very large and long slug. That slug or a snail raced across the outside of the window, going from bottom right to upper left, and as it did so, it made that squeaking sound, and it appeared to remove a bit of the layer of pumpkin slime off the window behind its trail. Then the slug and its shadow withdrew from the window, seemed to disappear or fly off into space, only to appear again on the lower right of the glass pane and begin racing and sliding upward and to the left, just as it had done before. This time, when the long, slimy trail wiped the window just a slight bit more clean in its wake, I could see through the glass just a tiny bit more clearly. And I could have sworn I saw the form of one of those dogmen out there on the little roof ledge outside my second-story bedroom window. My sleepy mind wasn't comprehending any of this until that slug landed on the glass again, and this time I could see clearly enough to understand that the thing I was imagining as a slug was actually the long dog tongue of one of the dogmen licking up that nasty overripe pumpkin on the outside of the window. At first I was unable to move, straining and waiting to see more of that thing man out there. I was just a few feet away from it, and I found it impossible not to stare. This thing had teeth longer than my fingers. Can you visualize that? It had black lips and yellow teeth, a black nose, and eyes that glowed too brightly for me to really make out any color in it all. The tip of its nose was covered in pumpkin gunk, and it looked like a complete mess. As I stood there, somewhat in shock, and somewhat still asleep, the beast out there suddenly noticed me, standing inside the room. In a shockingly quick movement, the dog face and those teeth at once moved away, and yet closer to the glass. It was now in a position where we could both see each other better, and it used the opportunity to bare those giant fangs at me. The creature started growling so loudly and so frenetically that I could easily hear it on the other side of the glass. When its steamy breathing fogged up the only parts of the window that either of us could see through, I made a break for the hallway outside of my room. I tried to shout a warning to my family, but my throat and mouth were so dry from open-mouthed gaping at that dogman outside the window that I found myself as unable to utter a sound as if I had been suffering from sleep paralysis. In the moment that I was unintentionally silent, I heard the beast man climbing around the house up there on the outside of the second floor. I tried to think of what windows might be open, and it dawned on me that the first room he would pass would be my sister's. I banged hard and hysterically on her door. Then, when I tried to speak, I choked and coughed loudly instead. I remember both my parents being there suddenly, and my father breaking my sister's door open after she screamed from inside. The dogman I had seen was picking at my sister's window screen. She liked to sleep with at least one window open, even in winter. This was a fairly warm autumn night, so she had her window wide open, but the screen down. She hadn't wanted any mosquitoes or flies to get in. But that night, we all got visited by a completely different kind of pest. My father ran directly at the window, screaming like some sort of caveman or something. He was charging with such gusto that I thought he was going to fly right through the window's screen. My mom seemed to think so as well, and she screamed my father's name. My sister and I just screamed incoherently, and I'm not sure which one of us hit the higher note either. I can't remember ever being so scared, and in so many different ways at once. I was scared of that thing getting in, but I was just as scared of my father flying out the window, or getting clawed up by the huge canine man that was better at climbing than any dog I'd ever met. So as pathetic as we all were, well, I mean, besides my madman father, who was ready to fist fight that monster if he needed to, something that we did scared the creature off the ledge and down into the yard, where it ran on 4 legs through a jack-o'-lantern display, spitefully smashing most of them to pieces, just because he could. That night, I swear to you, we all climbed the ladder to the attic and slept in our sleeping bags, which we had stashed up there with our camping equipment. Outside, we could still hear those things down there, creating more chaos than we'd experienced in all our lives back in Jersey, where we came from. It was an uncomfortable few hours of rest until it was time to get up and clean the yard before church. Every time my sister or I complained, we'd get lectured that we should be grateful it wasn't a school day. Our upcoming classes were going to be starting over 2 hours before church was. So when we got outside to survey the destruction, we were surprised to see that most of the pumpkins themselves were entirely removed. There were some small pieces and some pumpkin innards gore left around that was now basically at one with the lawn and hard to get out. The rest of the displays had been knocked around, but the main target of the monsters seems to have been the pumpkins. My father instructed us to take everything down and just clean up as well as we could. When we'd done our best, he wanted to hose the lawn down and get some more of the pumpkin out of the grass. To be honest, if the Dogman hadn't eaten or carried off so much of their mess, it would have been a much worse situation for us to handle. While we were cleaning, some neighbors came over to help us out, and we made our first friends. There was a girl in the neighborhood who was around my age, and she helped us clean for a while. She also had a list of stories about the area, local legends, I guess you might say. The girl rattled off short elevator versions of one local legend after another, entertaining us all as we worked. Then, suddenly, she started to tell a story about the Wisconsin werewolf, and she stopped, observing us. She smiled when we all instantly reacted to the word werewolf. She knew what had created this mess in our yard. I don't know how she knew, but she knew. The family gathered around as this young woman told us story after story about the werewolf, insisting it was actually a dogman. The pack of animals we watched wrecking our Halloween displays was not a group of shapeshifters like in the movies. That's what she informed us anyway. It was a kind of an animal, one that is known to eat human flesh, but also known to gorge on pumpkins when they're in season, or even a bit overripe, apparently. I'm pretty familiar with the Dogman these days, obviously, but that was the first time I had heard about a werewolf who stays in werewolf form all the time. You know, that girl was very nice to me, and both my parents thought she wanted me to ask her out. The thing is, I had seen those dogmen with my own eyes, and I knew they were real, but I didn't know that they weren't actually werewolves. And if I were a werewolf, I would tell people that there was no such thing as me. I would tell people that if they saw me in my werewolf form, that it wasn't me. It was actually some dogman, some animal, who can never change back to human form. If they believed me about that, then I could get close enough to them that I could victimize them in whatever werewolf way a werewolf wanted. So I genuinely wondered if that girl was a wolf girl, and if I hadn't already seen her the previous night. I was always polite to her, but I kept my distance, and I never talked to her for even 1 second longer than I needed to in order to be polite. Her family ended up moving in the middle of the semester, and I breathed a sigh of relief, even though she might have been innocent, and she might have been telling me the absolute truth. I don't think I'll ever know. Anyway, we slept with windows closed and locked straight through until the spring of the next year. But we never saw any dogmen or other strange creatures or people around our house. My sister inherited the place and lives there with her life partner and 2 adopted kids. She told me they sleep with the window open and the screen down. The dogmen have never put in a return appearance. That house had been left empty for almost 5 years before we moved in. So my father and I both came around to thinking that the dogman must have been using that land for something while it was unoccupied. It could have been something as simple as them using it to pass from one woods to another, since we are out in the country. Sort of. Or almost. It might explain why they acted so cranky and spiteful when we moved in and took over the place. It might also explain why they didn't bother us again after that night. They had spent their anger. They had gorged on pumpkins, and I bet the next day they had some bad indigestion. They were probably too sick to bother us for a while. And once they were better, why would they want to return to a place that had made them sick? Plus, the property smelled of humans now. And to a dogman, that must be sort of like having the cooties. Whether that theory makes sense or is stupid, none of us have ever had a second experience with any cryptid at all. But one time is more than enough when you got to witness the Dogman Pumpkin Massacre. Valerie Gomez, aka Nicole. She's as cool as the Dogman Swole. She's a badass if truth be told. Valerie Gomez, aka Nicole. Please join me in thanking today's executive producer, top tier channel member Valerie Gomez, aka Nicole Gomez. Without her, today's episode would not have been possible. Here to explain the perks that VG aka NG receives, and which you can receive as well, may I present our international TV spokesmongrel, Henry Lee Dogman. Thanks, Biggie, and thanks to all of you for watching this far. If you liked it, please click like. If you'd like to see more of our work, please subscribe. And also click that bell icon if you'd like to be notified when we put out a new episode. To become an executive producer, you can donate to us through the thanks button under each of our videos or through our paypal.me/PeterBernard209 page. To receive cool perks like secret uncensored Dogman episodes far too wild to ever run on this channel, you can become a YouTube channel member by clicking the join button, or join our PayPal subscribers club at peterbernard.com. Joining either at the $3 a month level or above gets you access to our over 25 hours of secret uncensored Dogman stories available nowhere else. Do you have a scary story about Dogman or some other kind of high strangeness that happened to you? Let us know by emailing us at scarystoriesnyc@gmail.com or by leaving us a voicemail message at 804-LA-SCARY. You may need to call back on that one. It cuts off after I think 3 minutes. And if you don't want to do any of that stuff, thank you for simply watching to the end. Good night, and have a scary tomorrow.
Come back for more scary stories.